Reed walked alone on the dusty road. His boots were old and torn, his clothes dirty from the wind and heat. The sun above was red and cruel, burning everything it touched. His hoverbike hummed beside him, floating low, almost out of power. He had kept it on low fuel mode for days, saving the last bit of energy, because once the bike stopped, he knew he would be truly stranded. The desert stretched forever in all directions. No towns, no trees, not even birds in the sky. Just broken rocks, dry wind, and endless silence. Reed was tired, thirsty, and had only 2 bites of food left in his bag. He hadn't seen another living soul in 3 days. Still, he kept walking, 1 foot after the other. His mind focused on survival, not hope. Then he saw it, a flash of color near the rocks. Something, not shaped like stone. He stopped and narrowed his eyes. It was small, curled up like a bundle. At first, he thought it was a piece of cloth, maybe trash, but then it moved, barely, slowly, like something breathing weakly. Reed moved closer, carefully. His hand hovered near his belt knife just in case. When he reached the bundle, he froze. It was a girl, an alien girl. She was small, her body thin and shaking, her skin a pale blue. Her arms were scratched and bruised, her clothes torn. She looked no older than 16, maybe younger. Her eyes were half open, staring at him without blinking. Not angry, not afraid, just empty. Reed knelt down beside her. "Hey," he said gently, "can you hear me?" She didn't speak, didn't move, just a slow breath and a tiny blink. He looked around, but there was no one else. No ship, no trail, no camp. It was like she had fallen from the sky. Reed took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She was freezing even in the heat. He checked her legs, twisted ankle. Dried blood on her knee. She couldn't walk, not like this. He had one choice, put her on the hoverbike. But if he did that, he couldn't ride it anymore. The bike could only carry 1 person now, and it was almost dead. Reed stood there for a long moment, thinking. He looked at the sky, then at the road ahead. No help was coming, no miracle waiting. He sighed and whispered, "You better be worth it." Then he gently lifted her and placed her on the hoverbike. She made a tiny sound, a weak breath, but still didn't speak. He adjusted the strap so she wouldn't fall, tied the last energy cell under the engine. Then he started walking, guiding the bike slowly beside him. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched long across the desert. Reed's throat was dry, his legs sore, but he didn't stop. The girl rested, quietly on the bike. Her eyes sometimes fluttered open, watching him with a strange look. Not fear, not trust. Something in between. That night, he stopped near a flat rock and made a tiny fire. He opened his food bag, only 2 pieces of dried fruit. He took one and gave the other to her. She stared at it like she didn't know what it was. Then slowly, carefully, she took it and nibbled. Her hands shook, her lips moved silently. No words came out. Reed leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Where did you come from?" But the girl didn't answer. She just sat there, quiet and still, like a ghost. The fire cracked softly. The wind was cold. Reed covered her again with his jacket. He lay on the sand beside the fire, tired and sore. His ride was gone. His future, unclear. But beside him, a stranger had been saved, and far away in the dark places of the desert, something else was watching, waiting, moving closer. The morning air was cold and dry. Reed opened his eyes slowly, his back aching from the hard ground. Ashes from the fire still glowed faintly, and the alien girl was awake. She sat quietly on the hoverbike, knees pulled to her chest. Her big eyes stared at him, unblinking, watching every move. She hadn't run away, hadn't tried to speak. Just silence, deep, still silence. Reed sat up and rubbed his face. He looked at her and forced a tired smile. "Still here, huh?" he said, his voice rough. The girl didn't reply, but something shifted in her gaze. She was no longer afraid, but not relaxed either. It was like she was trying to understand him. He pulled out a water tube from his bag. Just a few sips left. but he offered it to her first. She hesitated, then reached out. Her fingers brushed his by accident and she pulled back fast. Reed didn't react, didn't move. He just waited. After a moment, she took the water and drank, slowly, carefully, like it was her first time tasting water in days. Then she handed it back without a word. Reed nodded. "You're welcome." He stood up and stretched. The sun was rising fast, painting the rocks gold and red. The hoverbike was still working. Barely. He checked the power, just enough to keep her moving for a few more hours. He sighed and started walking again. Guiding the bike through the dust and gravel, she watched him the whole time. Her head tilted slightly, curious but quiet. She didn't ask questions, didn't make a sound, but her eyes spoke volumes. As the sun climbed higher, the heat returned. Reed's shirt clung to his back, sweat running down his neck. His legs felt heavy, and the ground seemed to pull him down with every step. Still, he pushed forward, keeping his hand on the hoverbike's handle. His boots scraped the rocks, one foot after another. Sometimes he glanced at her. She was staring at the sky, or at the sand, or at him, her face unreadable but never blank. There was something behind those eyes, like a storm trapped in glass. A few hours later, they stopped by a ridge for rest. Reed sat down, breathing hard. The girl slid off the bike and sat near him. Not too close, not too far. She looked at the wounds on her legs. Deep cuts, dried blood, dirty skin. Reed reached for his small med kit. "I'll help you," he said gently. She looked up sharply, her body tensing. He opened the kit slowly, showing her it was safe. Bandages, antiseptic, nothing sharp. He tore a piece of cloth, soaked it in the liquid, and waited. After a long pause, she gave a small nod just once. He cleaned the wound carefully. She winced, but didn't pull away. Her skin was softer than human skin, cool to the touch, almost. Like silk, he worked in silence, and she stared at him. Eyes wide, always watching. When he finished, she surprised him by gently touching his hand. Then she tapped her chest with 2 fingers. Then tapped his chest. Reed blinked. "Is that?" "Thank you." She didn't answer, but her lips moved. No sound came out, just the shape of words that never left her throat. Reed realized something. She couldn't speak. Her voice was broken, or maybe stolen. Maybe that's why she looked so lost. Suddenly, a loud screech echoed across the desert, a sharp, inhuman cry that made the rocks tremble. Reed jumped to his feet, pulling her behind a tall boulder. She didn't fight. She moved with him, fast, alert. Her eyes were full of fear now, but also something else. Recognition. What was that? Reed whispered. She didn't answer. But her body was shaking. She drew something in the sand with her finger, a spiral with 3 dots, then she pointed toward the sound. Whatever that noise was. She knew it. Another screech echoed. Closer this time, Reed grabbed his knife, his heart pounding. The girl grabbed his wrist and shook her head hard. She pointed at the fire pit they left behind, then at herself, then back at the ridge. She was telling him something important. Then, without warning, she placed her hand on the ground, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. A faint blue glow appeared under her palm, barely visible in the daylight. The glow spread in thin lines like veins of light reaching out across the sand. Then it faded as fast as it came. Reed stared, speechless. She stood up and walked back, to the bike, calm now, focused. Her silence was no longer weakness, it was strength. And Reed was starting to realize this girl was not just lost. She was something far more. And someone, or something, was coming for her. The sun fell fast behind the stone hills. Night returned like a heavy curtain, cold and full of secrets. Reed sat near the girl, watching as she wrapped herself in the jacket he gave her. She didn't ask for food, didn't speak, just sat close to the weak fire. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It felt like something deep was building, unspoken trust. Reed glanced at the dark horizon. His instincts screamed danger, but there was no sign, no sound. The desert seemed empty, but too quiet. Even the insects were gone, no buzzing, no night birds, nothing. Just wind and dry sand whispering around the rocks. Something's wrong, Reed murmured to himself. The girl looked at him, then at the fire. Her eyes held that same storm, silent but powerful. She reached down and drew again in the dirt. This time she made a large circle with small lines inside. Then she wiped it away fast, like someone might. See, Reed leaned forward. What does it mean? Are they coming? She stared at him but didn't answer. Instead, she took a small flat stone, pressed it to her forehead, then handed it to him. He looked at it, confused. Just a smooth rock. But when he touched it, something strange happened. A faint image formed in his mind, not a word, not a sound, just a feeling. Fear. Running, fire, screams, and shadows with claws. Reed pulled back, heart racing. That's what chased you, he whispered. She nodded slowly, eyes wide. Suddenly the fire dimmed, flickering lower as if choked by the air. Then he heard it, a sound, soft at first, stones rolling, distant, and fast. Then another, closer this time, like claws scratching dry earth. Reed stood quickly and pulled the girl behind a tall rock. He peeked around the edge, holding his belt knife tight. The fire behind them sputtered out completely, as if ordered to die. From the darkness, something moved. A shape. Long, hunched, walking low, sniffing the ground. Its eyes glowed red, its body covered in black armor-like skin. It looked like a beast from a nightmare. Half wolf, half machine. Reed's breath caught in his throat. He had fought wild beasts before, but this was different. This one hunted with purpose. The girl pressed her hand to his chest. Her eyes told him not to fight. Not yet. Reed nodded, crouching low, trying not to breathe. The beast came closer, sniffing near the fire remains. It snarled, showing sharp teeth, then raised its head. Listening. Suddenly it turned sharply and faced their direction. Reed froze, his grip tightening on the knife. The girl stepped forward slowly, before Reed could stop her. She stood in full view. Arms, open, silent, and calm. No, Reed whispered, reaching for her, but she raised one hand without looking at him, asking him to stay. The beast stopped in its tracks. Its body shook, its head tilted, confused. Then she opened her mouth and let out a soundless cry. No voice came, but the silence itself bent with energy. A pulse spread through the air like pressure, invisible but strong. The beast flinched, howled, and stumbled back. Its legs trembled and its red eyes flickered like broken lights. Then, it turned and ran, fast into the darkness. Gone within seconds, swallowed by the night. Reed stared, stunned. The girl turned to him, her hands still glowing faint blue. She looked pale, tired, almost ready to fall. Reed caught her before she collapsed, lowering her gently to the ground. He held her close, unsure what just happened. But one thing was clear. This girl was not weak. She was dangerous, in a way he didn't yet understand. He placed her back on the hoverbike seat and lit a small glow stick. The light was dim, but better than nothing. He sat beside her, watching the shadows around them. More might come, and he didn't know if she had the strength to stop another. As the wind picked up and howled through the rocks, Reed couldn't sleep. He kept watch, knife in hand, eyes scanning every movement. The girl slept fitfully, murmuring without words. He wondered what kind of war she had escaped, and what followed, her still. When the first light of dawn touched the edge of the desert, he knew one thing. He had to get her to safety. But where was safe in a land where shadows listened and silence killed? Reed looked at her face in the soft light. She looked peaceful now, even gentle, but the truth was clear. She wasn't just a lost girl. She was part of something bigger, something hidden, and the next time those shadows returned, they might not come alone. The morning sun rose slow and pale. Its light touched the cracked ground, revealing blood on Reed's boots. He hadn't noticed the blisters forming on his feet. All night he had kept watch, the knife still gripped in his shaking hand. Beside him, the alien girl slept, her skin cold but calm. She looked younger in the daylight, more fragile than before. But Reed knew better now. There was power inside her, a power that scared even monsters. He stood up with effort, stretching his sore arms. The hoverbike gave a low hum. It was still working, but just barely. He checked the battery level again. It blinked red. Final charge. Just a few more hours. Before the engine would die completely, the girl opened her eyes slowly and looked at him. She didn't speak, but gave a tiny nod. Reed returned the nod and helped her onto the bike. He didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stay. By noon, the desert heat became sharp again. Waves of air shimmered above the ground, and sand stuck to their skin. Reed's legs ached, but he walked without stopping, guiding the hoverbike over stones and hills, always watching the horizon. He saw something far away, sharp shapes poking from the sand. Buildings, maybe, or ruins. He smiled weakly. That could be shelter. As they got closer, he realized it was an old outpost, half buried. Metal walls rusted, doors broken, but still standing. There was an old sign, covered in dust, written in both human and alien script. It once belonged to a neutral aid station, abandoned. Long ago, Reed helped the girl inside and looked around. There were broken supply crates, a shattered water tank, and a cracked transmitter. He rushed to the panel and pressed the button. Nothing. He opened the back. Wires fried. No power core. The girl sat against a wall. Watching silently, she pointed to the transmitter, then shook her head slowly. She already knew. It wouldn't work. Reed sat down beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. His throat was dry, his vision blurry. "This place used to be safe," he said quietly, "but not anymore." She didn't answer, just looked around with tired eyes. Then she saw something on the wall, a symbol, scratched deeply into the metal. Her eyes widened. She crawled toward it, reached out and touched it gently. It was her people's mark, but it had been crossed out, burned over with black flame residue. Her fingers trembled as she traced it. Then she lowered her hand, closed her eyes, and pressed her forehead against it. Reed understood then. This place wasn't just abandoned, it had been purged. Her people had been here, and someone had wiped them out. Suddenly, the girl stood up and turned to him. She pointed at her chest, then made an X with her arms, then pointed to the sky and mimed a falling motion. Reed stared at her, trying to follow. "You ran from something in the sky?" She nodded, then looked down. She was alone, not by accident. She was hunted. A soft hum broke the silence. Reed turned fast. Outside the window, a small scout drone hovered low. He grabbed the girl and pulled her behind the wall. The drone floated, passed slowly, scanning with a red beam. It paused over the hoverbike, then blinked and flew off. Reed's heart pounded in his chest. "Damn it," he muttered. "They're tracking us now." He looked at the girl. She was shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper. She pointed to her wrist, then the drone. He saw it now, a tiny blinking chip beneath her skin. A tracker. Without thinking, Reed pulled out his belt knife. She flinched, but he gave her a calm look. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. He showed her the chip under the skin, then held up the knife, asking with his eyes. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He sterilized the blade with fire and cut carefully. She didn't scream, didn't cry, only clenched her jaw as the blood dripped. When he pulled the chip out, he crushed it with a rock. The red light blinked once, then died. Reed cleaned the wound and wrapped it. "You're free now," he said. She looked at him, then placed her hand on his chest again. A small glow passed between them, like thanks. Then she leaned back and closed her eyes, finally resting. But Reed didn't rest. He stood near the window, knife still in hand. He had no more food, no more water, no more signal to call help. He had sacrificed his only ride for her. And now, something knew where they were. He whispered to himself. Was this kindness worth the price? But somewhere deep inside, he already knew the answer. Yes, because the girl wasn't just an alien. She was a target, a survivor, and maybe a key to something far greater than he could imagine. The wind outside grew stronger. Dust swirled through the broken walls of the outpost. Reed stood near the hoverbike, staring at the red blinking battery light. One last bar, one final burst of power. That was all it had left. He looked back at the girl. She was sitting on the cold floor, head leaning against the wall, eyes half closed. She hadn't said a word since the tracker was removed, but something had changed in her. She no longer looked like a scared child. Now she looked like someone waiting for something or someone. Reed walked over, crouched beside her. "We can't stay here," he said softly. She opened her eyes and nodded. Her lips moved silently, forming shapes without sound. He couldn't read her lips, but he felt the message. She knew it too. The hunters were still coming. He stood and pulled out the small energy cell from his pouch. It was the last one, barely working. He connected it to the bike and checked the readings. Just enough charge to travel one last time. Not enough for two people, not even close, he sighed, running a hand through his dirty hair. He had known this moment would come. He looked at her again, at her thin frame and bruised arms. She wouldn't survive another chase on foot. She needed the bike. "I'll walk," he said quietly, almost to himself. She didn't understand the words, but she saw the decision in his face. She stood up quickly and shook her head. She pointed at him, then the bike, then back to him again. "No," he said gently. "You need it more than I do." He helped her sit on the bike, adjusted the seat and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at him, eyes wide and shimmering. Then she reached for his hand, held it tightly. Her small fingers trembled, but her grip was strong. She placed her hand on his heart one more time, glowing faintly. Then she pointed at the horizon. "Go," he whispered, stepping back. He slapped the side of the bike and it jerked forward with a low hum. The girl's eyes never left him as the bike picked up speed. She turned once, looked back, and then vanished into the dusty trail. Gone like a shadow pulled by the wind, Reed stood alone, staring at the spot where she disappeared. His chest felt heavy. He had just given away his only ride, his only chance of escaping this desert. But he didn't regret it. Not for a second. The sun climbed higher. He started walking step by step, his legs stiff. Every few meters he paused, scanned the sky. No ships, no drones. Not yet. But the silence no longer felt safe. It felt like something was watching again. By the time the sun was at its peak, Reed's lips were dry and cracked. His water pack was empty, his legs shaking. Still he walked. He remembered something his old captain used to say. A man only knows what he's made of when he has nothing left. Suddenly the ground rumbled. Reed dropped to one knee, thinking it was an earthquake. But no, it wasn't the earth. It was engines, big ones. From the ridge ahead, 3 armored drones flew in fast, sleek, silent, shaped like birds with steel claws. They circled above him, scanning. Reed stood slowly, holding his hands out to show he was unarmed. The drones scanned his body, flashing lights across his chest. One of them paused. Red light flickered, then turned blue. A cold voice echoed from a speaker. Subject untagged, not marked, not important. Then the drone turned and flew off. The others followed, fading into the sky like ghosts. Reed dropped to his knees, breathing hard. He had been ignored, not captured, not killed, just dismissed. It should have hurt his pride, but all he felt was relief. He crawled into the shade of a rock and sat down. His feet were bleeding, arms burned from the sun. His body was weak, but his heart still beat strong. He looked at the sky and smiled. "She got away," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Then his vision blurred, the light dimmed, the wind howled. He closed his eyes, maybe for the last time, but there was no fear. Just peace, because even if he didn't make it, he had given her a chance, and something inside him said she would return when the time was right. The sky turned pale above the desert. The cold wind brushed the sand, and silence hung heavy like a blanket. Reed lay curled beneath the rock ledge, arms around his chest. His breathing was slow, shallow, and weak. His skin burned from the sun, lips cracked, hands shaking. He hadn't moved in hours, maybe longer. Time felt like dust blowing and vanishing. The last thing he remembered was the hoverbike speeding away, the girl wrapped in the jacket he gave her, disappearing into the golden light. And now, nothing. Just silence, cold, and the distant ache in his bones. But then, something soft touched his cheek. A breeze? A shadow? No, it was warmer, gentler, like fingers. Reed blinked slowly, his eyes struggling to open, and there she was. The alien girl stood over him, her face lit by the early light of dawn. Her eyes shimmered with silver tears, but her expression was strong. She knelt beside him and placed her hand gently on his chest. A soft blue glow spread across his ribs. Warmth rushed through him. First his lungs, then his heart. His pain faded like mist under sunlight. He coughed weakly, then gasped. "You came back," he whispered, barely believing it. She nodded slowly, her hand still glowing. But she wasn't alone. Reed turned his head and saw them. 3 more alien women, standing behind her, taller, older, wrapped in cloaks of soft crystal fabric. Their eyes were quiet, their movements graceful and slow. They didn't speak, but their presence was powerful. Each carried something. One held a silver staff, another a pouch of seeds, the third a folded banner marked with the same spiral symbol the girl had drawn in the sand. Reed tried to sit up, but the girl gently pushed him back down. Not with force, just care. She touched his forehead and breathed deeply. A songless hum filled the air like wind chimes in the soul. His heartbeat steadied, his mind cleared. He could finally breathe. The eldest woman stepped forward and knelt. Beside him, she looked into his eyes, then slowly placed her palm on the ground. From beneath her hand, green light bloomed. A flower, a real flower, grew from the dry, cracked sand. Reed stared in awe. Life, where death ruled. The second woman opened her pouch and sprinkled seeds into the wind. They danced in the air, glowing softly before falling around him. Each seed turned into a spark, fading into the earth like whispers. The third woman raised the banner and pressed it into the sand. The symbol of the spiral with 3 dots shimmered like silver ink. Reed looked up at the girl, his girl. She was no longer the broken thing he had found near the rocks. Now she stood tall, steady, her silent voice strong in her gaze. She had returned not as a victim, but as someone chosen. He tried to speak, but she stopped him instead. She placed something in his hand, a crystal warm and pulsing like a heartbeat. As soon as he touched it, visions filled his mind. He saw her past. A village under fire, machines burning the sky, children screaming. Her sisters dragged away. She ran, she hid, she was lost until a human stranger gave her his jacket and his only ride. He saw her escape. The hoverbike reaching a hidden cave, old symbols glowing as she arrived. Her sisters awakened by the crystal in her chest. The silent call. A return. A promise kept. Reed's eyes filled with tears. "You found them," he whispered. "You brought them back." She nodded again, then leaned close and pressed her forehead to his. Her touch was cold but comforting. She didn't need words. Her actions had spoken louder than any language. The other women surrounded them in a circle. They began to hum. Not music, but a rhythm of memory. It was ancient and deep, a prayer without sound. And Reed understood. He had been part of something sacred, not just survival, but a bond across worlds. He had given everything. His ride, his strength, his trust. And now they gave something back. Not payment, not reward, but honor. A promise that his kindness would never be forgotten. The girl stood and helped him rise. His legs were shaky, but her hand held firm. They looked at the horizon together, and for the first time he saw not emptiness, but a path. Dawn had arrived, and with it, something new. The morning sun painted the desert in soft gold. Wind danced around the rocks, gentle now, not cruel. Reed stood among the alien sisters, his feet still sore, his body worn, but he no longer felt weak. He felt seen. The girl stood beside him, quiet, steady, no longer afraid. Her small hand held his tightly. There were no words between them, only understanding. They had crossed the edge of survival together. Now something new was beginning. The eldest of the three alien women stepped forward. She carried a long silver cloth in her arms, woven with tiny stars. She bowed her head slightly, then wrapped the cloth gently around Reed's shoulders. It was light, soft, and warm. Like being hugged by the sky. He didn't know the meaning, but he understood the message. You are one of us now. The second sister came next. She opened a small stone box and lifted out a smooth oval crystal. It glowed faintly blue and hummed in her hand. She offered it to the girl, who took it with both hands and stepped toward Reed. Slowly, she lifted it and placed it against his chest. The glow spread through his body, warm, pulsing, real. Then it sank into him and vanished, leaving only a strange calm. He blinked, confused. What was that? He asked, though he knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, she touched his forehead and breathed out slowly. And in that moment, he heard her voice. Not through ears, but through feeling. You gave without knowing who I was. You carried me when I could not walk. You gave up your only ride and still smiled. Now, I give you my bond. Reed staggered back slightly, overwhelmed, his heartbeat stronger, his limbs lighter. The girl looked into his eyes, then pressed her hand to his chest once more. He understood now. He wasn't just a man who helped. He was chosen. The third sister approached. She placed a small seed in Reed's hand, shaped like a tear, glowing faint green. Then she pointed to the sand. Reed knelt and planted the seed, covering it gently. The women began to hum again, low, melodic, and deep. And within seconds, the earth stirred. A plant bloomed from the sand, tall and silver-leaved. Its flower opened to the sky, releasing a soft light. It was not of Earth, not of any world Reed had ever seen, but it was alive, born from their bond. The girl walked to the flower and pulled one petal. She held it like a ribbon, then turned to Reed. She reached out, tied it softly around his wrist. The color shimmered as it touched his skin. Then she smiled, a small, real smile, the first he had ever seen from her. Reed felt tears in his eyes. You never said a word, he whispered, but you spoke louder than anyone. She leaned in and pressed her forehead to his one last time. No glow, no power, just silence and warmth. Then she stepped back. The three sisters gathered around her. Together, they looked to the east, toward the rising sun, and then, without speaking, they walked away. Their steps left no prints in the sand. Their shapes shimmered, flickered, and slowly faded into the light. Reed stood alone, the silver cloth still on his shoulders, the petal still on his wrist. The flower beside him danced in the wind, but he wasn't sad, he wasn't broken, he was honored. He had given everything, his strength, his bike, even his hope. And in return, they gave him something few ever received, belonging, not to their world, not to their tribe, but to their story. He looked down at the petal on his wrist. It pulsed, once gently, a final message. When the stars cry and the shadows rise, call and we will come. Reed smiled, then turned toward the west. The desert was still wide and dry, but he no longer feared it. He had walked it once, and survived. Now, he walked not as a stranger but as a man who was remembered. With each step the wind followed soft behind him, carrying no words, only meaning, the kind of meaning that stays long after the story ends, and somewhere far away, in a place beyond. Stars, a silent girl with silver eyes watched him, still smiling.